All right, I'm gonna do some poking around and then I'll bring you guys back up. Let me see if I have a scan tool here that can do a regen, that can do a forced regen with this vehicle. Okay. So I'm gonna do some poking around and then I'll bring you guys back up so we can decide about our next step. I did some poking around. Our RTL tool is unable to allow us to do a forced regeneration, and we also don't have an option to open up the EGR. So right now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the vehicle in the shop. We're gonna put it on the lift. I wanna get access to the mass airflow sensor and look at it. Let's check the mass airflow sensor and see if it's good. I'm gonna get the vehicle on the lift and then I'll bring you guys back up. So now we're gonna test our mass airflow sensor. Here is our mass airflow sensor. This is the electrical connector of it. So I'm gonna disconnect the electrical connector of the mass airflow sensor. So this mass airflow sensor houses the intake air temperature sensor and the mass airflow sensor. Okay, you're gonna see that this electrical connector has a lot of wires. Some of the wires are for the intake air temperature sensor. Now, what I'm gonna do is I am going to back probe this gray wire, which is our mass airflow sensor signal wire. We're gonna check the signal coming out of the mass airflow sensor. I'm now gonna check our powers and grounds at the mass airflow sensor electrical connector because I believe we don't have a power or a ground issue. If we were missing power or ground at the mass airflow sensor, we were gonna have a circuit code. Before I back probe this wire, I'm gonna show you the wiring layout on the component on the service info before we back probe this wire. Here is what I did off camera. I looked up our mass airflow sensor in the guided component test, and here is the electrical connector of the mass airflow sensor. If we go down this list, we will see that our mass airflow sensor signal is the 8th wire. So wire number 8 is our mass airflow sensor signal, and it's the gray and white wire. I'm gonna back probe this wire and then I'm gonna bring you guys back up so we can see what kind of signal we have at this wire with the engine running. I'm gonna get this wire back probed and then I'll bring you guys back up. I have back probed the signal wire of the mass airflow sensor. I'm grounding my scope over here at the starter bolt, and as you can see over there, we are back probing the signal wire at the mass airflow sensor electrical connector. So now I'm gonna lower the vehicle so we can start the engine and see what kind of voltage we have on the MAF signal wire while the engine is running. I have lowered the vehicle, so now let's set up our lab scope. Let's go to scope multimeter. We're just gonna use one channel on the scope. So now I'm gonna go in the vehicle and start the engine. So let's see what we got. So I'm gonna have you guys focus on the lab scope screen. As you can see, when I turned the key on, our voltage on the lab scope screen went up to 2.7 volts. So now I'm gonna start the engine. So the engine is running. So we have about 2.6 volts on the lab scope screen. Now I'm gonna rev it. So when I rev up the engine, our voltage doesn't change that much. So the voltage goes up a little bit. I hear a noise under the hood. I don't know if you can hear it. Let me zoom you guys out. So when I rev it, listen. I hope the camera is picking this up. I'm hearing a little bit of a clicking sound coming from under the hood. So I don't know if the camera is picking that up. I'm gonna show you the lab scope screen again, and then I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do to fix this problem. Alright guys, I'm gonna turn off the engine. So here's what we're gonna do. Based on the voltage that I see on the lab scope screen, I don't think we have a mass airflow sensor problem, okay? That voltage of 2.6 volts at idle coming from the mass airflow sensor signal wire is good. If our mass airflow sensor was the problem, that voltage was gonna be either higher or lower. If we go to the mass airflow sensor and unplug it, we're gonna lose this voltage. Based on this number, I believe our mass airflow sensor is good. Although there is no big change when I accelerate, this mass airflow sensor barely changes when you accelerate. That's kind of what I have noticed on these ProMasters. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. I'm gonna change the direction we are taking to fix this problem. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna focus on the EGR valve. Based on the number we saw on the lab scope screen, I don't think we have a mass airflow sensor issue. We could have a valve that's sticking. Remember when we drove the vehicle, our EGR valve data PIDs were a little bit suspicious, okay? What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take you with me under the hood. I'm gonna show you where the EGR valve is. I'm gonna remove the EGR valve. I'm gonna clean it. We're gonna clean the EGR valve and the throttle body. Let's get it out and clean it because I believe we have a lot of carbon build up around the EGR valve that's causing the EGR valve to stick, okay? I think this is a sticking EGR valve problem. I'm gonna get to it. We're gonna clean the valve. We're gonna clean the passage of the EGR valve and then we're gonna put it back together and see what happens. And I'm pretty sure after we get this EGR valve cleaned, this is gonna be fixed, okay? Let's stay away from the mass airflow sensor. The mass airflow sensor code, in this case, I believe, is the byproduct of what's going on with the EGR valve, okay? The EGR valve sticking is causing the mass airflow sensor code to be set in the engine computer, all right? So let's not get thrown off by the mass airflow sensor code. So now let's go under the hood and get access to the EGR valve. We are here under the hood. Our EGR valve is somewhere over here around the back of the engine, okay? I don't enjoy working on RAM ProMasters, especially working under the hood. Everything is so compact. There isn't enough room around the engine. Working around here can be a little bit of a pain. So I'm now gonna film the process of removing the EGR valve. To get to the EGR valve, I'm gonna have to remove all these tubes around here. I'm probably gonna have to remove the air filter box. Once I get all this stuff out of the way, I'm gonna get access to the EGR valve. I'm gonna remove it. I'm also gonna remove the throttle body and the EGR tube so we can clean them, okay? I'm pretty sure there's carbon buildup around the valve. This vehicle only has 106,000 miles, okay? So I don't believe the EGR valve is bad. Unless it's really, really bad, then I will have to replace it. But I don't think we're gonna have to replace the EGR valve. I'm sure after we clean it, we're gonna be good to go, okay? So I'm gonna get access to the valve, I'm gonna clean it. Once I get the valve removed, I will bring you guys back up so I can show you. But I'm gonna do all of this off camera because I don't have enough room to put the camera so I can show you what I'm doing. I will get the EGR valve removed off camera and then I'll bring you guys back up. I wanna show you the EGR valve before I remove it. After I have removed the cabin air filter housing, this is what we have. Our EGR valve is right here. So this is the valve. And this over here is the EGR cooler, okay? This big aluminum piece that you see over here is the EGR cooler. Now, to remove the EGR valve, I'm going to undo this bolt over here, this bolt, and then this one. I'm gonna disconnect the electrical connector, and then our EGR valve is going to come out, okay? So just like that. So we got the connector disconnected. So now what I have to do is undoing these two bolts and then the EGR valve is gonna come out. I'm going to mark our gasket because it's always good to mark these gaskets. I will see if we have this gasket at the dealer. If the dealer doesn't have this gasket, I'll probably reuse them, but I prefer to replace them. Okay, we're gonna remove the EGR valve, we're gonna clean it, and after that I'm going to remove the throttle body. Here is our throttle body. I'm gonna remove it and clean it also. To remove the throttle body, I'm going to undo this bolt over here, this one, and then we have 2 more back there. Or I can just undo these bolts over here to remove the top part of the throttle body. So this one, this bolt, and then this bolt, and then we have 2 more back here, this one, and then that one over there. Okay, and then I'm gonna disconnect this electrical connector so we can get the throttle body removed. Okay, so I'm going to clean the throttle and the EGR valve. Okay, and when I have the valve removed, I'm going to use sharp air and blow off any carbon that we're gonna have build up around the EGR valve. That carbon is gonna get blown through the EGR cooler and through the EGR tube. This over here is the EGR tube. So whatever air you blow through this over here, this cooler, it's gonna go through this tube and into the intake, and it's gonna come out the opening of the throttle body. If we have a good airflow coming out of the throttle body opening, that's gonna tell me that our EGR passage is not blocked. Okay, so that's how we can test the EGR passage with sharp air. Okay, because our scan tool would not allow us to open the EGR valve. So I'm gonna undo these components off camera, and then I'll bring you guys back up after I get all these components removed. I want to show you how this EGR valve is gonna look as I remove it. Okay, I have removed the bolts that hold it in place. So now we're gonna gently wiggle the valve. We're gonna gently wiggle it out. Man, there's a lot of carbon built up around this valve. So there's a bracket here. So it's actually hitting against. So there's a bracket over here. So it's actually hitting this nut. Okay. I'm gonna remove this bracket around the EGR valve, and after that I'll bring you guys back up. I removed the bolt that was preventing the EGR valve to come out. So now our valve should now be able to come out. So here it is. Okay. All right, so we're gonna put it over here on the bench. We're gonna clean that off. Okay, I'm also gonna clean the passage over here. Look at all this carbon built up, okay, around the EGR seat. So I'm going to clean this really nicely. Okay, so we're gonna remove this little shim over here. So I'm gonna clean that off. Okay, I'll do the cleaning off camera. Now I'm gonna remove the throttle body, and we're also gonna clean the throttle body. I'm gonna get these bolts removed, and then I'll bring you guys back up. I removed these 3 bolts. So now we're gonna lift this tube. Oh wow, look at what we got. You see all this carbon? Jeez. Look at all this carbon built up on the throttle plate. Actually, there's a lot of carbon built up in the intake manifold. You see all of this? This is a lot of carbon built up. So let's remove the throttle body first. If it's really dirty in there, we're gonna have to remove the intake manifold and clean it. Okay, so this carbon buildup will definitely cause the symptom that the owner is experiencing. Okay, this is what causes the throttle plate or the EGR valve to stick. Okay, all this carbon build up over here. So I'm gonna let's remove the whole throttle body. We're gonna clean it, and I'll see if I can just clean the intake manifold without removing it. I'm gonna get the throttle body removed, and then I'll bring you guys back up. I got the throttle body removed, and here it is. Look at all this carbon build up around the throttle. This is like thick carbon build up, okay? And this will prevent the throttle body from closing all the way, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to remove the top part of the intake manifold. So it looks like I can remove the top part of the intake manifold by undoing these bolts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we have more around here, okay? I'm gonna undo the EGR tube so I can remove the top of the intake manifold and clean the intake manifold, which is good because I don't have to remove the whole intake manifold. Look at all this carbon, look. You see? This is a lot of carbon buildup. And this is gonna cause EGR codes to be set in the engine computer. So this is gonna cause the EGR valve to stick, or the throttle body to stick also, okay? So I'm gonna remove the top part of the intake manifold so we can clean the manifold really well. I'm also gonna clean the throttle body off camera. I'm gonna clean the EGR valve. Actually, after I clean the EGR valve, what we're gonna do is we're gonna turn on the EGR motor with the battery to see how smooth the EGR valve is gonna open and close, okay? So we have 5 pins on the EGR connector. So the first 3 pins over here will be for the EGR position sensor, and then the 2 pins up here will be for the EGR motor. So this over here is pin 1, and this over here is pin 5, okay? We're gonna send power and ground to these 2 pins, okay, to watch the EGR motor or the EGR valve open and close. It should open and close smoothly, okay? I am going to clean this off camera. I'm gonna clean the intake manifold, and then I'll bring you guys back up after I get these components cleaned, okay? So I'm gonna get these connectors disconnected. I'm gonna get all these wires out of the way so I can remove the top part of the intake manifold. So after I do that, I'll bring you guys back up. I had to remove the intake manifold. I couldn't get the top part of the intake manifold removed while the entire intake manifold was in the engine because I couldn't remove these 2 bolts, okay? So these 2 bolts could not come out because of the fuel rail mountings over here on the valve cover, okay? So to get this top part of the intake manifold removed while the intake is on the engine, I had to remove the valve cover. So removing the whole intake manifold was the best option. So I got the whole manifold out. We're gonna take the manifold to the bench and undo these bolts so we can remove the top part of the intake manifold, and then we're gonna clean it, okay? So look how dirty it is. We're gonna see it very well when we remove the cover, the top part of the intake manifold. So we're gonna take this to the bench. We're gonna clean this. I'm also gonna clean the orifice over here on the cylinder head. We're gonna clean this very well, okay? After we get everything cleaned, I'm gonna bring you guys back up so we can put everything back together. Let's take our manifold to the bench. I removed these bolts that hold the top part of the intake manifold to the lower intake manifold. So now let's remove this. Look at all the carbon that came out of this intake manifold. See that? So I'm gonna remove our intake manifold. Look at all this carbon. Yeah, so this over here will definitely cause some EGR codes to be set in the engine computer, okay? So you see that? Look at that. So look at that. I'm gonna get the intake manifold cleaned off camera. After I get it cleaned, I'm gonna show it to you before I install it. Okay, so I'm gonna get it cleaned and then I'll bring you guys back up. I have cleaned the intake mating surface off camera and the intake ports. So here they are. As you can see, these ports are cleaned. So I got them as clean as I could. So as you can see, this looks a lot better than before. I also cleaned the EGR valve seat over here. And then what I did afterwards was I used my air nozzle and blew off all the carbon that we had in the EGR cooler. So I blew it off on this side, and then I also blew it off on this side over here on the EGR tube. So there was a lot of carbon that came out. It was really nasty. So I cleaned the tube, I cleaned the EGR cooler, so we should be good to go. Okay, so this is cleaned. So now let's go to the bench so I can show you the intake manifold that I cleaned, and after that I'm gonna install it. I have cleaned our intake manifold. As you can see, our intake manifold is clean. It definitely looks a lot better than before. Okay, I also cleaned our throttle body. As you can see, the throttle is clean. I also cleaned the EGR valve. I was gonna test this EGR valve with the battery, but I'm not gonna do that. Okay, I'm gonna put the intake manifold, these two pieces of the intake manifold together, and I'm gonna install everything. This over here had a lot of carbon built up around the valve. I don't need to test this. Okay, if we had a valve that was bad, we were gonna have a valve code, a EGR motor code or circuit code. So, and since this is pretty easy to remove, if I ever want to test it, I can remove it and test it. Okay, it's pretty easy to remove. So I'm not gonna test it right now. I'm gonna put these two guys together. I'm gonna reinstall the intake manifold. I'm gonna put everything back together, and after I put everything back together, I'll bring you guys back up so we can start the engine and verify our repair. So I'll put everything back together and then I'll bring you guys back up. I have reinstalled everything. As you can see, we got our intake manifold back on the engine. The throttle body is installed. The EGR valve is installed. So now let's go in the vehicle and start the engine. So as you can hear, the engine is running. So now let's go back under the hood and do a visual inspection. It sounds good. We don't have any leaks around the engine. Everything looks good. Let's look under the vehicle. As you can see, we don't have a leak down here, so we're good to go. So now I'm gonna put everything back together. I'm gonna put all the covers together, and after I put all the covers together, we're gonna erase the trouble codes, and then we're gonna take the vehicle for a test drive. So I'm gonna put the covers back on, and then I'll bring you guys back up. Alright guys, I got everything back together. Now we're gonna close the hood so we can take this vehicle on a test drive. Okay, I'm gonna turn the key on. We're gonna erase all the trouble codes first before we go on a test drive. Now, there was a glow plug trouble code. Remember when we first scanned the engine computer, on the generic side of the tool, there was a glow plug trouble code in the engine computer. I wanted to replace the glow plug. It was the third glow plug that was throwing a trouble code. I wanted to replace it when I had the intake out, but the glow plug was completely stuck. Okay, so I couldn't remove it. After we finish with this repair, I'm gonna tell the customer to take the vehicle to the machine shop so that the machinist can pull out the glow plug. They're probably gonna have to cut it off and drill it out and retap the hole so they can put a different glow plug there. So I tried removing it, but it was just spinning, so I didn't want to go any further. I just left it alone. We're gonna have someone else deal with it. I mean, these glow plugs on these small diesel engines sometimes can be a pain, especially when they stick. If they're completely stuck, I have a friend that removes them, so we're probably gonna have to send the vehicle there. We got all the trouble codes erased. Now let's do a code scan before we go on a test drive. So we got 0 codes in the engine computer. That's good. Remember before, when we drove the vehicle, within 10 minutes of the test drive, the throttle body light started flashing and the check engine light was on. Our mass airflow sensor code was on and our EGR code was on. Now, this is on the generic side of the tool. We're gonna disregard these 2 codes. So this is the trouble code I was talking about, the glow plug trouble code. I wanted to replace this trouble code when I had the intake out, but this glow plug is stuck on. Okay, so we're gonna have my friend at the machine shop deal with that. So we're good. I'm gonna get the scan tool out of the way. Let's start the engine and go on a test drive. All right, we're gonna drive out of the shop. So let's take this baby on the road and see how she drives. So right off the bat, I can feel that the vehicle now has a lot of power. I'm barely accelerating, okay? So this is a good sign. The vehicle has a lot of power. We're good. So now let's get on the road and see. I remember before, by the time we got here, our throttle light was flashing already. Okay, the throttle light is now flashing, check engine light is off, so we're good. So guys, this is fixed. I feel comfortable with how this vehicle drives, okay? The vehicle now has a lot of power. Before it couldn't even go over 40 miles an hour. But right now, we're already going over 40. Right there, we're doing about 50 miles an hour. So this is fixed, guys. So the problem on this vehicle was a sticking EGR valve. The EGR valve was sticking, so it was causing the engine computer to go into a limp mode, which was causing the power loss. Okay, so no parts replaced. Okay, we didn't replace anything. We cleaned the intake manifold, we cleaned the EGR valve, and now the vehicle has a lot of power. The throttle light is no longer flashing. We're good to go. We also cleaned the throttle body, by the way, so This is fixed, guys. I feel comfortable delivering this back to the customer. So this vehicle didn't need a mass airflow sensor, so that mass airflow sensor trouble code was the byproduct of the EGR valve sticking. Okay, so that's what was causing the mass airflow sensor code to be set in the engine computer. The vehicle now has a lot of power. Remember, before we couldn't go over 40 miles an hour. Right now we're doing about 70 miles an hour. The throttle light is not flashing. Okay, but this is fixed. Okay, I feel comfortable giving this back to the customer. This vehicle is fixed. Check engine light is off. Okay, no throttle light. The throttle light is no longer flashing. Before the repair, when I was driving the van, within 10 minutes or 5 minutes of driving, the throttle light was flashing. And right now the throttle light is not flashing. So we're good to go. I'm going to turn around here and drive back to the shop so we can wrap up this video. So cleaning the EGR valve and the intake manifold and the throttle body fixed this vehicle. Okay, so the problem on this vehicle was the sticking EGR valve. Okay, so the EGR valve was sticking, which was causing the engine computer to go into a limp mode, and it was also causing the mass airflow sensor code to be set in the engine computer. Okay, so this is good. This is fixed. As you can see, we got no lights on the dash. We are good to go. I'm gonna drive back to the shop, and when I get to the shop, I'll bring you guys back up so we can wrap up this video. Alright guys, we are back at the shop. As you can see, the check engine light didn't come back on. The throttle body light didn't come back, so we're good to go. The vehicle now has a lot of power, so this is fixed. I'm gonna bring up our scan tool so we can scan the engine computer for the last time before we wrap up this video. I'm going to turn off the engine. I'm going to turn the key on. So let's scan the engine computer. We're going to do a code scan. Perfect. As you can see, no codes present in the engine computer. So we're good to go. So this is fixed. The vehicle now has a lot of power. The check engine light didn't come back. Okay. So the problem on this vehicle was a sticking EGR valve. So as you can see, the engine is running, no check engine light. So we're good to go. So now I'm going to turn off the engine so we can wrap up this video. So I'm gonna leave this right over here. This ProMaster is fixed. The problem on this ProMaster was a sticking EGR valve. There was too much carbon build up around the valve, and the intake manifold had a lot of carbon in it, so the EGR passage was partially clogged. So we cleaned everything. Now all is well. The vehicle now has a lot of power. So I'm gonna leave this right over here. I hope you liked the video. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.